Welcome back in. It's the Lions 24/7 podcast as we roll on through game week number 2. Spent a lot of time last episode talking about what stood out from that Wisconsin game, the victory that Penn State picked up last Saturday in the opener. I would highly encourage you, because that podcast didn't quite do it justice. Sean Fitz put together his second look, which is a pretty dynamic breakdown, in-depth breakdown of what went right, what went wrong for Penn State on the field Saturday. Wanted to make sure I put that out there for our listeners first and foremost, Sean, because great work on that piece from coming off of game one where, you know, it's our first time to really peel back the curtain a bit and see who stepped up and who needs work.
A good 3,000 words on a 16-10 game. So that was it was quite a stretch. But no, it's I do suggest you check it out. There's a lot in there. You always learn a lot more when you go back over the tape, and we certainly did.
That's on Lions247.com. That's also where you'll find every week our game week updates. Tuesdays and Wednesdays are the big days for that. Got underway yesterday with several conversations with players. We had James Franklin on for a press conference. We'll have more players. We'll have practice availability Wednesday. So a lot coming your way. We're going to have a guest on just a little while from now, Steve Wiltfong. You know him because he does such a tremendous job covering the national recruiting scene for 24/7 Sports. But you may not know, he also has a pretty good inside scoop on what Ball State is all about. He wrote a story in August about their rise to winning the MAC championship last year, a program that came a long way in a short period. We'll hear about Ball State's emergence, what kind of a threat they might pose to Penn State. And, of course, we're not going to have Steve Wiltfong on our show without talking some Penn State recruiting as well. But, Sean, let's get to some roster updates. Not a ton of information offered up by James Franklin, as you might anticipate coming off of the first week. But this press conference on Tuesday is what we'll get every 12:30 on Tuesday, confirming that Jordan Stout did indeed supplant Jake Pinniger as the full-time place kicker. We had wondered what those dynamics were. Coming out of week one, Jordan Stout was the guy. Jake Pinniger was available, but was on the sideline. That's been his job for the last 3 years. The last two with Jordan Stout on the roster, handling everything 42 yards and in. This time it comes to pure data, according to James Franklin. They gathered a bunch of information during preseason camp. They want everybody to know that they're competing for a job. Jordan Stout won it. Hell of a start as a punter. A lot to work on from a place kicking perspective. That goes for the entire operation execution, but this was just as simple as he beat out Jake Pinniger, and that's a guy who's played a lot of football for Penn State since he enrolled in 2018.
Certainly a big surprise when we saw him trot out there for the short field goal. Obviously didn't go as well as they expected it to go, but if that's what the data says, that's what the data says. And it was interesting. I kept waiting for James to say, we'll continue to track it through practice this week. He kind of stopped short of doing that. So it makes me wonder if it was that decisive in camp or something like that. Personally, that's a lot on his plate, punting, kicking off, doing field goals, and not just the long field goals, but doing all field goals. That's a lot on Jordan Stout. So be interesting to see if they continue to take that approach.
Stout was the Big Ten Special Teams Player of the Week. We referenced that last episode. He also got those honors from Penn State staff. Penn State staff going with Jahan Dotson as their offensive MVP at Wisconsin. No surprise there. Defensively, they split up that honor. Arnold Ebiketie, the defensive end, first game since coming over from Temple. And then additionally, Jaquan Brisker, of course, who was Superman in a lot of ways during that game. And then on the offensive front, Sean, I
actually think you got that one wrong, because Penn State's Special Teams Player of the Week, I believe, was Drew Hartlaw. So
then I did get that wrong.
It wasn't even the Special Teams Player of the Week. At least the graphic that I blindly retweeted said that. So,
well, I blindly didn't look at it. So
mine was Chris Stoll, but you guys know that if you follow my Twitter. So he was terrific. But anyway, we'll move on from Special Teams Player of the Week, because we've spent enough time on that.
That's right. Over on the offensive front, Sean, you spent a lot of time on this in your second look, because there's a lot to still be desired from that group, and there's a lot to be desired from that left guard spot, because the starter Anthony Wiggin, I think you phrased it as shell-shocked. I don't know if that was on the podcast or what you wrote up, but I think that sums it up pretty well, what we saw from him for a few series. Eric Wilson was the next man in and didn't come back out. And you wonder what that means for week 2. James Franklin saying that they are going to combine what they saw on Saturday with what they see on the practice field this week to determine what that outlook is at left guard on Saturday. But I'll tell you what, Eric Wilson, made his case. He wasn't dominant out there, but when you're measuring up against the guy who was in there before him, it's hard to reconcile, with Anthony Wiggin being the better option in week 2.
Yeah, the data would point to Wilson on that, and it's not particularly close. Wigan was just overwhelmed when he was out there. I think he played 3 series and didn't get anywhere in run blocking, pass blocking, stunt. He was just completely turned around with stunts and things like that. So it was unfortunate to see, especially because they were high on what he did in camp. But Wilson's the experienced guy. Maybe take some time to catch up to that. It wouldn't shock me if 3 weeks from now he was, in the groove and playing all the time and doing a really good job. But he's still got some work to do. Everybody up front's got some work to do. Nobody's excluded from that conversation. So that's one of the big takeaways is you got to get better up front, and they got to get in the film room and work things out. I think the first game film, being so long, the first time they've all played together, being so long away from typical coaching and typical film situations, getting them back into that and seeing that film should help them out. So I'm not sounding the alarm or anything like that just yet, but they got to get better.
And once again, we'll say it, this may have been the biggest test this offensive line will face for 8 weeks of this season. We'll find out about that, but this is a heck of a Wisconsin front that they just faced to open the season. A lot to work on, though, on the offensive front, as you wrote up in your second look. So that's to be determined who's going to be the starter at left guard. What also is to be determined is whether 3 players that we were anticipating would play a significant role for this squad this year will be available for game 2. They were not on the travel roster in Madison last Saturday. Defensive lineman Akeem Beeman, safety Keaton Ellis, running back John Lovett. We had Beeman and Ellis pegged as second teamers at their respective position, competing on that 2 deep. And then John Lovett has certainly been a guy that we factored in for that third running back spot, which ultimately was Devin Ford last Saturday. No clarity from James Franklin. I had to ask the question, though, because these are 3 notable players who didn't go to the first game, but nothing imminent. And, not even one of these guys was singled out in terms of he'll be back. And James Franklin has gone so far to say, he'll be ready for us in this week. He was not going down that road with me at all. And that was the end of the press conference.
How you feeling today? He smacked you down pretty hard, didn't he?
I feel pretty good about asking the question. I'm surprised no one asked the first 45 minutes of the press conference about 3 players missing, but I'm glad I asked the question. However he wanted to answer it, it's his right to do. He's the guy answering the questions, but I felt like we needed to at least address the absence of those 3 guys from your first game.
No doubt about it. The question needed to be asked. I'm shocked it wasn't asked in the first 40 minutes or whatever we got of James Franklin on Tuesday. So, that's definitely one that you're going to continue to monitor throughout the week. We saw them all 3 at practice last week. So to me, that says not an injury situation, not a COVID situation. That's an off the field situation that needs to be taken care of, and very much an in-house one, as James Franklin alluded to yesterday.
Something else that surfaced on Tuesday, Sean, is the new AP poll. Of course, we expect to see that every Sunday moving forward, but with the big opening weekend for college football extending all the way into Monday night, Tuesday was the day that was updated. Big jump for the Nittany Lions, going from number 19 in the preseason AP Top 25 all the way to number 11. Wisconsin crossed paths with them from number 12 to number 18 following their 16-10 loss. But man, we said that this win at Wisconsin could really set the stage for Penn State to do big things. I mean, there's a long way to go, but sitting at number 11 in the country 1 week into a season that followed a 4-5 campaign, that's pretty well set up, Sean.
Yeah, I mean, that's about as good as you could expect. And obviously, some other teams are, moving up, other teams moving down, especially after some teams falling flat on their face in week 1. And now you've got now all of a sudden you've got a top 10 Iowa team playing a top 10 Iowa State team in that game this weekend. So that'll be exciting. But no, I mean, it's a good leap. It shows that, people respect defense. That obviously if you watch that game, you came away wanting more offense, but at the same time, you watch Clemson and Georgia play the other day. Clemson stayed in the top 10 despite that loss. So maybe there's a little bit more respect for defense coming back around. And maybe I think all these teams need something more on the offensive side of the ball. But Penn State's in a pretty good spot right now. I certainly did not have them at number 11 going into week 2 myself.
No, and of course you face a risk when you open the season at Wisconsin at a ranked opponent, but the reward at the other end, if you come away with a win, is that is going to be an early dose of respects. A lot of teams got to go late into the season to start picking up some momentum. Penn State has a great opportunity here. They got Ball State coming in. We'll talk about that in a bit with Steve Wiltfong, a team that you shouldn't be sleeping on. And then, of course, next week, newly into the top 25 at number 25, actually, the Auburn Tigers come to town for a whiteout matchup. So Auburn should be unbeaten when they come here in week 3. Penn State can handle its business against Ball State. That's another ranked matchup with all the eyes of the college football universe, or at least many of them, on Beaver Stadium for the return of the whiteout. And you're looking at yet another springboard opportunity for Penn State.
And Penn State would rather be 1-0, wondering if they're good enough to be number 11, than 0-1, saying they got a moral victory on the road at Wisconsin, or they got a moral victory and a loss on the road to Wisconsin. So they'll take that number 11, run with it, and be perfectly happy.
Much easier for us to talk about real victories versus moral victories too on this show, Sean. And when I look at the top 25 now, there's some shuffling up top. You've got Alabama still at number 1 after they throttled Miami. Georgia's up to 2 from 5 after beating Clemson. Clemson drops from 3 to 6. Ohio State up to number 3 from 4. Oklahoma at 4, and Texas A&M at number 5. Looking at the Big Ten, Ohio State, of course, leading the way at number 3. Iowa, you mentioned, they're number 10. They'll play number 9, Iowa State, this weekend. What a matchup that will be. And then, as I said, number 25, Auburn still in the schedule. So Indiana drops out of the top 25 rankings. You got Auburn climbing into them. So Penn State with 1 top 25 victory now under their belt, 3 ranked opponents, 2 of them inside the top 10, still ahead on the schedule. And it goes without saying, these rankings could completely, dramatically change by the time these matchups actually happen.
Yeah, it's preseason. It's the preseason effect, so not surprised where anybody falls. I actually thought Michigan might be a little bit higher, but I think people are kind of taking the wait and see approach with Harbaugh. I think that's perfectly reasonable, but I thought they might be a little bit higher than 31.
Yeah, Michigan technically at that number 31 spot, and that's the next up on the Big Ten once you get by Wisconsin at number 18.
Others receiving votes.
Others receiving votes, yes. 5-star mailbag time. We're going to do that ahead of our conversation with Steve Wiltfong. And this is an interesting one because in the first game for Penn State, we expected a pretty tight rotation across the field in that kind of environment. We've said for a while, this freshman class in 2021, not really sure what you're going to get out of a small group there. 14 true freshmen on scholarship here at Penn State in 2021. And our question heads right in that direction. Aside from Kalen King, do you expect any freshmen to become contributors by the time Penn State is in the heart of its Big Ten schedule? I'm going to define the heart of its Big Ten schedule. Let's say by the time they get on a plane and go to Columbus for that final week of October, because that's somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, the heart of the Big Ten schedule started this weekend. So, but I doubt it. This is not a class with a ton of early impact potential. Guys, especially coming in at certain positions with more in front of them. Kalen King obviously was going to play from the jump. Caleb Brown, the walk-on quarterback from the Reading area, he played on special teams right away, which is awesome.
That's really cool.
This is a kid that we highlighted a couple of weeks ago on our walk-on special. Ran a 4.4 for the staff. Was a high school quarterback, really good athlete. So for him to get out there and be able to contribute on day one is an unbelievable story for him because he just got here a couple of weeks ago. So. That's really cool. Kalen King, Kobe King, both traveled. Liam Clifford and Harrison Wallace both traveled. Jalen Reed, probably that next guy that you could see being thrown into a special teams role. And I think this weekend we see some of these guys, if it goes to the way that Penn State's coaching staff hope it goes, and Penn State fans hope it goes, where you can get a lead, get some of these guys in there, maybe rotate Landon Tangwall in there. I tell you what, I was surprised Davon Townley made the trip. That was an interesting one because he, granted he's from out in Minnesota, so I'm sure I may have had family come over to Wisconsin for that one. But he's a project. He's not going to play this year. I mean, he might be a guy that you see sliding at the end of Villanova or something like that, but he's a long way. And I think James Franklin said it on the radio show the other day, he's a long way from being a finished product. But that was interesting to see him pop up on the travel roster because if we'll get into the rules here. The Big Ten allows 74 guys to travel. And that's not much at all, especially when you consider you've got 85 scholarship guys. So typically a lot of freshmen don't go. Some of the guys that are buried on the depth chart, and if you know where you stand in that sort of thing. But to see him make the trip among that 74 was eye-opening to me. And of course, Christian Veillere, they're going to take all the quarterbacks that they can take. Mason Stahl was there, so they had 4 quarterbacks along with the trip. So going back to the meat of the question, not really. I might see those receivers start to get their feet wet. We saw Cam Sullivan Brown and Winston Eubanks were out there for a couple of snaps, but for the most part, the heavy reps went to the top 3 guys. So beyond that, I have a tough time seeing anybody at least crack a rotation the way that Kalen King should be able to do that through this season.
Yeah, the phrasing here is, do you expect And I think you're right on it. But I mean, what are we monitoring? We're monitoring a bunch of these guys and seeing maybe it could happen down the road. I mean, not everybody who ends up burning a red shirt that sets that course for themselves from the start of September. Jahan Dotson a few years ago, that they weren't planning on burning his red shirt. He ends up starting toward the tail end of the year. Of course, just a couple years ago, Marquise Wilson wasn't going to burn his red shirt. They saw enough on the practice field. They saw enough confidence. He ends up playing quite a bit of cornerback during a run to the Cotton Bowl in 2019. So I am definitely looking at Harrison Wallace, who we continue to hear good things about from an athletic arsenal standpoint, and then Liam Clifford from a preparation standpoint, just because, through 1 week, very, very, very top heavy with that wide receiver rotation, not really much of an indication. I think the opportunity to go out there and impress, get your feet wet, get some film, it's going to happen. You'd like to think this Saturday. You certainly would think September 25th, when Villanova comes to town, will be a really good chance for us to see a lot of these freshmen involved, playing in front of a crowd at Beaver Stadium. There's something to be said for that, no matter when it happens in a game. But the staff is going to be able to deliberate on this on a week-by-week basis. I think right now, though, the way this team was able to bring back so much experience and also bringing in a very small freshman class, it doesn't add up to really make you think you're going to see a lot of first-year players jumping up the depth chart and getting super involved here down the stretch.
Plus, when you bring in transfers, guys, not even guys like Ebiketie, who came in and started, but a guy like AJ Litton to come in and be a gunner for you and do those things right off the bat, kind of takes some off the plate for maybe some of the true freshmen that could potentially get in there. Like I said, I could see Jalen Reed on special teams. You could see Kobe King on special teams. Could see Tangwall getting some reps as the season progresses, and you still got that 4-game limit, so you can play in 4 games and still keep that red shirt. Also, on the flip side of what you said, you remember Cade Wallace and Lance Dixon were 2 guys that they initially green-lighted, and then they pulled it back and said we're not going to play them in more than 4 games. So I don't see that. I don't see anybody on this list that would be close to that or potentially find themselves in that situation. But you never know, especially with the receivers. That's a tight rotation on the road in game 1, and then all of a sudden you could open that up. You could see Liam Clifford and Harrison Wallace on the field on Saturday. It wouldn't shock me at all. So, and then they could play their way to potentially being a guy that burns that red shirt. But from the start, we kind of said this. Maybe Lonnie White would have been one of those guys that could have played and could have stuck with a full green light, but not really looking at it from this class.
Yeah, excellent point with the transfers. You bring in 6 new scholarship guys. You only have 14 true freshmen now on the roster, and you retained some seniors from last year's roster that you thought you were going to leave in the grand scheme of the personnel plan, and the pandemic rolls through and changes that up. So not a great spot to be for these freshmen, but they'll have their opportunities. They've got a lot of practices ahead here. Injuries are part of the game. It looks like Penn State was able to make it out of week 1 relatively unscathed in the medical department, but that is not going to hold true week in, week out. So we'll keep tabs on these freshmen. A good question, very early to answer a question like this, but certainly in comparison to the last few years, we're not saying green light, green light, green light, like we've been able to kind of go down a list at this time of the year.
Yeah, I mean, it happens with some classes. It doesn't happen with other, especially when you've got guys that, this was a pandemic class, so they're probably not as familiar with what they had coming in. Obviously they like a lot of these guys. You're taking 9 scholarship guys or 10 scholarship guys on the road with you. That's a pretty good start, especially from a class that was only 16 or 17 guys. So I think that's a solid start, but the expectations should be low for immediate impact.
Thank you for the question. You can share yours with us up on Apple Podcasts. We look forward to getting that from you. Penn State football, Penn State recruiting. We'd love to get your questions. We'll answer it here in our 5-star mailbag. Let's get into the conversation on game number 2 for these Nittany Lions. Ball State coming to town on Saturday for a 3:30 kickoff. First time back in Beaver Stadium with all of you. Bunch of people in the crowd once again since 2019. Looking forward to that. Of course, there is a game to be played on the field, and I know a lot of people want to look towards that whiteout matchup on September 18th, but Ball State coming off of a conference championship, and to help us break them down and certainly get into some other conversations here on the Lions 24/7 podcast, Steve Wiltfong. Steve, you know your way around Indiana. We're going to tap into that a little bit here because Ball State coming to town, and a team that I think Penn State fans, some of them paying attention to for longer than others. Some maybe haven't really heard of Ball State going into this week. We're bringing you in because just a few weeks ago, you wrote an excellent piece breaking down the rise of this Cardinals program under their current head coach, Mike New, who is a former Ball State player. First and foremost, welcome to the show, Steve. And I know a lot of our listeners are going to be surprised That's the Ball State guy you're bringing on?
Hey guys, how you doing, man?
We're great.
Yeah, I got a chance to visit with the Ball State football program a few weeks ago. My wife's from Muncie, Indiana. Her dad coached at Ball State and does the radio broadcast for the Fighting Football Cardinals now. And I was there for her 20-year reunion and got a chance to go up there and see their new facilities. And they got their MAC championship rings the day before, and there was a lot of energy in the building over there. And this is a good mid-major football team.
They are 1-0 coming off of a 31-21 victory over Western Illinois going back into last season. They've got an 8-game regular season win streak, I believe it is now. Can we start with kind of the basics here? You wrote about the rise. Where was this program coming from, and where are they going into this 2021 season?
Well, back in 2017, this was a program that was losing their games by 30, 40 points. But Mike New, their head football coach, he played quarterback at Ball State, won a MAC championship when he was under center, then went on to coach in the NFL, coached with the New Orleans Saints, coached Drew Brees. When Drew Brees set the passing record, he sent him an autographed game ball as a thank you for helping him along the way. And so I thought that was a pretty cool touch by Drew Brees. But, Mike New's at his alma mater. He's got a laid-back, positive personality that I think really resonated in the locker room, especially when they were getting served up by 30 or 40 not too long ago. But they chipped away at it, and then obviously last year exploded. And I think this is a game that's going to be a nice measuring stick for them to see where they truly are as a football program.
I'm looking back at last year's schedule. They opened the year with a 38-31 loss at Miami of Ohio, and then they reel off 6 consecutive wins. They're the MAC champions is an abbreviated season, of course. They play in the Arizona Bowl against 22nd ranked San Jose State, and they win that game by 21 points. You talked about the laid-back atmosphere, but was there also a sense that confidence is on the rise? Because it seemed like they probably proved a lot to themselves over the course of last season. Do you feel like that momentum has been carried into another year?
And they beat Buffalo in the MAC championship game too, and that was a heavily favored ranked Buffalo team. Their head football coach is Lance Leipold, is now the head football coach at Kansas. They had Jared Patterson, the prolific running back, and Ball State's defensive coordinator, Tyler Stockton, in that defense, which picked off 10 passes last year and kind of had the recipe to slow Patterson down as well. It's an aggressive, advantageous defense that forces turnovers and plays with a ton of confidence. And this is a program that invested in their recruiting, invested in their players, and developed them and brought them along. And those same guys that were losing by 30, 40 are still there right now. And Coach Mike New told me that they never want to go back to that. And so even when they were awarded their MAC championship rings, it was like a celebration for like 10 minutes. Then it was, on to the season and making sure that this program doesn't take any steps backward this year, because everybody in that locker room, for the most part, knows what it was like on the other side of the coin.
Steve,
Sean,
before we get into personnel on the field, Tyler Stockton's a name that Penn State fans that are pretty, of a certain age will remember. Class of 2009, went to Notre Dame. He's a Jersey kid. Penn State recruited him heavily. James Franklin has had him on his radar before. Where is he at as a coach right now, and where do you think his ceiling is as a potential position coach, coordinator, eventual head coach within the coaching ranks?
Well, I know that Stockton had some opportunities to be a Power 5 position coach this season, but this is a Ball State football team that brought back like 18 or 19 starters from the year before. So they were really excited about this campaign. And then I think also he's the play caller for the defense right now. I don't think he's going to give that up for any opportunity to just move into the Power 5 ranks. I think he's a guy that's got a great reputation. He's very smart. And a lot of coaches have him on the radar. And I think that, where Ball State's at as a program, he can be a little choosy of where he wants his next move to go. But he loves calling plays. He loves the players in the Ball State locker room, and he wasn't going to just leave them to go be a Power 5 linebackers coach, because that's what people do in that profession, to keep moving up the ladder. He's excited about where he's at right now.
He's always been a sharp kid on the
Sean,
field.
we had him listed as 6'1", though, man, back in the day. My man is not 6'1".
No, he's certainly not. This is before we started verifying that a little bit closer. Actually, he's class of 2009, so he was never actually on the 24/7 Sports Network. So if he would have been, we would have had that taken
We
care
played
of.
in the All-America Bowl, and I remember had a good showing there. But there's definitely some more scrutinizing on the height and weights these days, even by the college programs.
Absolutely.
You know.
Absolutely. You watch Penn State this week. You know Penn State's personnel very well from covering recruiting, covering the Nittany Lions. Where do you think, who are a couple of guys on Ball State's roster that can give Penn State a little bit of frustration? You know, you expect if you're Penn State, you want to make a statement and roll over the mid-major program, but there's always a couple guys on each MAC roster that could play at this level.
Right. So I think that the guy that's the highlight right away is Justin Hall. He's their dynamic receiver. He's a 5'9" bottle of lightning. He's out of Georgia, Douglasville, Georgia. He's a fifth year. He's the career record holder with over 250 receptions. Scored 2 touchdowns in the opener. He's a touchdown waiting to happen. And to stop Justin Hall from getting the football, Penn State's going to have to intercept the ball from the center to quarterback Drew Plitt on the snap, because they're going to find ways to get it to him. And he was a really good player in high school, had over 70 receptions for almost 1,000 yards and 11 touchdowns, and was his region's player of the year, and also was dynamic in the return game. So he's the guy that Ball State can get big plays from, and he has that kind of ability against anybody. So Justin Hall's a guy that you're going to want to mark. Drew Plitt, the quarterback's a 3-year starter. They got some guys in the running back room. Will Jones went for almost 100 yards in the opener. True freshman Carson Steele, I think he's got like a 400-pound bench press. He's from Center Grove High School, won a state championship last year, was Indiana's Mr. Football. Had just 7 carries in the opener, but ripped off a 37-yard touchdown run. I think as their season continues, he's going to become more relevant for them. But Center Grove plays in the largest class in Indiana in the best conference. So Carson Steele's played against the Cole Brevards of the world in high school and has always been successful. But
and he's Dylan Wiltfong's favorite player, right?
He is. My son watched the state title game over Thanksgiving last year where he went nuts, and he already wants the Colts to draft Carson Steele. And I kept telling him, hey, man, he hasn't even played a game at Ball State. And then sure enough, in his first game, his guy rips off a touchdown. But, so their offense has some guys that are physical and dynamic. And then, on defense, they return 9 starters. Brandon Martin's the heart and soul of that defense, and he's a former running back that converted to linebacker, and that's kind of another narrative with this Ball State football team. A lot of guys played different positions in high school, but they've plugged them in and put them into different spots to just get some success, or get as much success out of them, or maximize their ability. Jalen Thomas is another difference maker on defense. Had 9 tackles in the opener. Was an all-conference player the year before. But they're going to try and force turnovers, and they have some guys that can be potent on offense. But as much as I'm loving up Ball State, Penn State should, this is an opponent that Penn State should handle if they want to be the football team that they think they can be and they've recruited towards, guys. And I've been a big believer in Penn State for a while. This is a team that's, knocked on the door of the college football playoff 3 times. They've played in 3 New Year's Six Bowls. They've won a Big Ten championship. Ball State's an opponent that is a good matchup for them to prepare them for Big Ten play, which has obviously already started for them. But this is a test that they should still pass rather easily.
Steve, you should have a pretty good read on quarterback Drew Plitt by now. You mentioned before a lot of experience. He's at almost 7,000 career passing yards, almost 900 career pass attempts with Ball State. What's kind of the read on what he brings to the field and where he might be exploitable and what he might do well?
Well, he's a guy that's incredibly confident, comes from Ohio, Loveland, Ohio. His athletic family, his sister's on the Ball State volleyball team, I believe. But he's a guy that he pushed through some of those. 2 years ago, he was on the field showing a lot of toughness and courage in some of those close losses. So he's a hard-nosed kid. I don't think he's going to be intimidated by the environment in Happy Valley. The Ball State offense has led. They led the MAC in scoring 2 years ago. And then last year, he was one of the more efficient passers in the country. So he takes care of the football. He knows where his guys are, reads defense as well, and makes things happen. So, for Penn State, you just want to get, like with any quarterback, you want to get him off his spot. You want to get pressure on him. You don't want him to get comfortable back there, because if he is, he's going to be able to pick apart Penn State's defense.
Steve, last week in Madison, Penn State struggled to move the football for much of the game, but Jahan Dotson got his at the end of the day, ended up helping change the complexion of that game. You know as well as anybody in the country what Parker Washington brings to the field. Keandre Lambert-Smith had himself a nice debut and as a second-year starter. And then across the board, the talent Penn State has. Defensively, does Ball State have a chance to handle what Penn State can throw their way? What is their best shot at slowing Penn State's weapons?
Well, Penn State is bringing back a veteran unit, and so guys that are confident, guys like Ekpe who can get to the quarterback, Anthony Ekpe, and they'll bring pressure from all over the place, But with the Crosby kid and guys like that, but I think that they're going to need to force some turnovers in this game to give themselves a chance to win and beat an opponent like Penn State on the road.
Steve, we last had you on this summer to talk recruiting, Penn State recruiting. A lot has happened since then. Penn State still with the #1 class in the country, went on a mega run in July. What have you seen from the Nittany Lions in this class, and what are you thinking with the whiteout right around the corner? What are you thinking with Penn State?
Well, I think this is a class that keeps Penn State on the trajectory of, hey, we're trying to win the Big Ten. We're trying to win more than the Big Ten. And if you look, it starts with the quarterback room. I think that's been a place where Penn State's obviously gotten inconsistent play since Trace McSorley has been on the roster. And I think if you look at Drew Aller and Bo Pribula, that's the best that Penn State has recruited the position, in my opinion. I think Drew Aller's got a chance to be a championship level quarterback, almost 6'5", almost 230 pounds. He's going to come in physically ready to go. And seeing him in several camp settings, how accurate he is from several arm angles, and he can make things happen on the move, and just set a county record or city record or something over the weekend for being a prolific passer. And then Bo Pribula is a good athlete, 6'2", 215 pounds. That's got a ton of confidence as well. That's going to play for his dream school. That I think also has the traits to be a high level quarterback at Penn State. So it starts there. You got to keep getting guys like Dennis Sutton. Penn State, one of the reasons why they're able to go toe-to-toe with Ohio State every year, and obviously James Franklin would like to win more of those games than he has, but Penn State's been in them, is because they have great pass rushers and guys that can be a difference in that regard. And I think Dennis Sutton, he was one of the more sought after defensive linemen in the country, and Penn State beats Georgia and Alabama to keep him in the area. Nicholas Singleton is a freak type running back. He's the type of guy that can win the 100-meter dash and the shot put in the same meet or in the same track meet. And so you have him. You have Katron Allen in the fold right now as well, who runs as hard as anybody I've seen in the country. It's a good looking offensive line class already with guys like Drew Shelton in the fold, and then Caden Saunders is a guy that can be another dynamic score on one touch type playmaker. And so this class is obviously really good. It's ranked #1 in the country. I think that they would like to add some more difference makers around the line of scrimmage on both sides of the ball. And, they're in on guys like Emil Wagner, and they're in on guys like Andre Roy on the offensive line. And, I think they'd like to get another playmaker at wideout, Andre Green or Darius Clemens or someone like that. You guys know, I should be asking you, where does Penn State want to go from here? DJ Wesolak's going to come to the wideout game. He's a guy that's a high-motored player on the perimeter of the defense. So they're in on some guys. Penn State's not done. It'll be interesting to see who they finish with. I know they would love to get Tyrese Fearby back in the fold. Who wouldn't? He's a high upside pass rusher as well from Pittsburgh, who, that recruitment's going to be a wild one. But you just want to lead on the last day for him.
Yeah, Steve, with the whiteout coming up, you've interviewed a bunch of recruits coming out of the whiteout in years past that I'm sure you'll be doing that again. What kind of a stage is this for Penn State? So many of these players haven't experienced a game on campus. And what exactly can Penn State gain coming out of this with 2023 kids in particular?
Well, that's an opportunity to play an SEC opponent in your stadium for a whiteout, and it's pretty cool that Penn State's going to have two of them this year. And I think with no fans in the stadium last year, the fans are really going to embrace two whiteouts and Auburn. That's going to be a big September game. And I've covered some of these home games, some of these big home games for years, and the environment and reaction from recruits. And I don't know if anything really touches the whiteout. I think that the amount of people that Penn State packs in and that kind of energy is off the charts. Now, I'll tell you, I personally have not been to a whiteout game. I went to a Ohio State, Penn State night game several years ago, and I was able to go to college games before I was covering all these weekends. And that was a pretty intimidating environment for Penn State. Hackenberg, I think, was a freshman. Y'all were ranked like 16th in the country. Y'all got your teeth kicked in that day. But where I'm going with that is the whiteout might have a better environment than that. And it was very electric at Penn State at Ohio State that night.
Yeah, it's one of those things that Penn State really can separate itself. And obviously you mentioned they've been on the doorstep of the playoff, but not quite there. That's one of those things that could play a little bit of a role in evening it out with some other schools. So
it's not easy to make the playoff. Not that many teams have made it. Penn State's been in the neighborhood, man. And so it was just kind of bizarre hearing the critiques of Coach Franklin last year and his staff. I mean, it was a weird year, but they've had a ton of success at Penn State. And a lot of people would love to be where you're at. And the good thing with Penn State is Penn State doesn't want to be where they're at. They want to go to another level. They want to play in that Final Four and win a national championship. And it takes a little different recipe. They're not recruiting some of the as many no-brainers as some of the schools that annually make it, but they recruit some from that. And then I think Penn State's shown with their ability to develop. They have one of the best strength and conditioning programs in the country. The NFL Combine shows that year in and year out. And then they're not scared. They're sure as hell not scared of Ohio State. Every time they play Ohio State, they're ready for that game mentally to go out on the field and battle with the Buckeyes, who are obviously extremely talented and as talented as any program in the country.
Well, a lot is desired to be accomplished by James Franklin and this staff. Stepping stone this Saturday. Can we get a prediction from you on this Ball State-Penn State matchup, whether it's a score, margin of victory? What are you thinking about this 3:30 kickoff?
Well, I think Penn State should win by 2 or 3 touchdowns. I mean, this is an opportunity for them to make a statement going into the Auburn game that, look, we didn't play as well as we wanted to at Wisconsin, but that was a good football team. We showed a lot of grit and toughness. Our defense was awesome. Our offense made enough plays in the second half, left some other plays out there. We're going to start playing more consistent, and it's going to start with a good opponent in Ball State. We're going to win by 2 or 3 touchdowns, and then we're going to get ready for a good Auburn team that hung like 50 on another MAC opponent. They played a MAC opponent in week 1, right?
Yep, Akron, yeah.
Yep, Akron.
Well, Steve Wiltfong wears a lot of hats for 24/7 Sports. A lot of you didn't know that included Ball State beat reporter, but we turned him into one here for the podcast episode. Steve, thank you so much for your insight, and we look forward to everything you bring from a recruiting content coverage all year long.
Yeah, y'all take care. We'll see you on Lions 247.
All right, Sean. Well, there he was, Steve Wiltfong. Always great to get him on the show, not only recruiting this time, but also to get a better understanding of these Cardinals. You and I are going to give our predictions for this matchup in episode 3 of the week. That'll be coming up on Thursday, per usual, with our new game week setup. Anything else to kind of follow up from what Steve threw our way there for about 20 minutes?
Nope, I think he did a pretty good job, especially getting into Penn State's recruiting and things like that. So worth a listen if in case you skipped over that. And by the way, we apologize for throwing 3 episodes at you in 3 days with the holiday. That's just kind of how it worked. And we plan to roll a Monday, Wednesday, and then later Thursday show for you in our game weeks, in addition to the post game podcast. So sorry if we gave you too much this week, but you're just gonna have to deal with it.
Go check out Sean's second look at the Penn State-Wisconsin game to get a better understanding of where these Nittany Lions are coming out of week one. That's over at Lions247.com, where you can also follow our midweek coverage of Penn State practice, Penn State player availabilities, and a couple spots here with James Franklin, our next chance to talk with the head coach for Penn State later this evening on Wednesday. That's all coming your way on Lions247.com. We'll be back with Lions 24/7 podcast, episode number 3 of the week on Thursday. For Sean Fitz, thank you to Steve Wiltfong. Thank you to producer Lance Glynn. I'm Tyler Donohoue. We'll talk to you real soon.